Here's a quick video to address a comment I see quite a lot. This one came from Twitter. I released an incredibly unpopular video a few weeks back and shamelessly self-promoted it on Twitter. It didn't go viral, definitely not COVID viral, but a few people shared it. So to start with, there were more COVID-19 deaths in May 2022 than all of 2020 combined. That's just a statement of fact. June is on track to be even worse. 3 weeks after the tweet, this pops up. First up, not sure who Steve is.
Steve?
But I can tell you it's not PR guy. Shout out to Steve for sharing the video though.
Steve!
So over 3 weeks after sharing my video, someone has obviously been trawling through Steve's Twitter timeline, clearly a fan of Steve.
Big fan.
And left this comment. Now if the key takeaway of anyone that either read my tweet or watched that video was that vaccines didn't work, then they clearly got the wrong end of the stick. Tired of trying to correct this stuff, I lazily replied, linking to information on how vaccines work. Then I was lamowed.
Oh my.
I thought I'd establish this point fairly clearly. 2022 has been bad, very bad. But I guess this is also where the misinformation, misunderstanding, miscomprehension, whatever the miss you choose comes in. There's an assumption that because there are more COVID-19 deaths now in Australia than in previous years, that this is somehow evidence, air quotes here, that the vaccines aren't working. This ignores one massive, and I mean massive, elephant in the room. Australia has essentially done nothing to limit the spread of COVID-19 in 2022, and this is reflected in the massive case numbers that dwarf anything we saw in 2020 or 2021. In 2022, the virus has been allowed to spread unchecked, and when you take into account the fact that case numbers in 2022 are likely heavily underreported, the numbers are staggering. The fact that there have been more COVID deaths in 2022 than there were in 2020 is not evidence that vaccines don't work. The numbers we're seeing could actually be taken as the complete opposite. Okay, so first up, let's assume you don't believe in science and medicine. So let's just ignore all that. Let's look at how we got here. In 2020, we did everything possible to contain the virus as there were no vaccines. In 2021, the federal government slowly rolled out the vaccines. With the New South Wales government botching their outbreak response, there were significantly more COVID cases in 2021. But we also saw an uptake of the vaccine increase around the same period. In 2022, the federal and state governments seem to have decided that the pandemic's over, and cases have predictably skyrocketed. On the flip side, we're now a highly vaccinated nation with over 95% of the eligible population having received 2 doses, and a growing number having received the booster. Outside of vaccination, there are essentially no other public health measures in play. So what are the key differences between 2020 and 2022? In 2020, there were no vaccines available. In 2022, the vast majority of the population have been vaccinated. In 2020, there were strict public health measures put in place to contain and eradicate the virus in Australia. That kept the case numbers relatively low. In 2022, essentially all public health measures have been removed, and the virus has been allowed to spread unchecked. Let's look at the numbers. In 2020, there were 29,756 COVID-19 cases and 909 deaths. In other words, 3.05% of people that contracted COVID died. In 2022, there have been 7,610,434 COVID-19 cases and 7,361 deaths. In other words, 0.1% of people that have contracted COVID have died in 2022. Now let's take the 2020 pre-vaccine death rate and look at how many people would have died in 2022 had 3.05% of all those contracting COVID died. If we'd seen the same death rate this year as pre-vaccine Australia in 2020, we'd have recorded approximately 232,118 deaths. Yeah, but what about variants and stuff? Omicron's not as bad.
Science and nature, innit?
So now you want to take a look at science? When Delta was discovered, it was said to be over twice as severe as the original strain, or what was kicking around in 2020. When Omicron emerged, it was sold to us as the mild and less severe alternative. Obviously that's a good story to tell if you want to restore consumer confidence and get people out there spending money, but it was also misleading. While it may be less severe than the Delta variant, Omicron can still be deadly. Research is emerging to show that the case fatality rate for Omicron is just under half that of Delta. Stick with me here because it gets a bit complicated. So if Delta was over twice as deadly as the original strain, and Omicron is less than half as deadly as Delta, by my reckoning, it puts the 2020 strain and Omicron on similar pegging. Even if Omicron turns out to be half as deadly as the original strain, we'd still have been looking at over 115,000 deaths in 2022 so far. The fact that we've recorded over 7,000 COVID deaths this year is not evidence that the vaccines don't work. It's evidence that they do.